writings, which is one that Dr. Cyrus always talks about and recommends others to read. He also won an award for poetry from the Association of Baha'i Studies. And he also wrote a book called A Love That Could Not Wait, which is a beautiful story of Catherine and Clifford Huxtable. I remember my mother telling me about them when I was young. They were a young Baha'i couple in Canada who rose to the call of pioneering and became Knights of Bahá'u'lláh. And this was despite the fact that she was wheelchair bound and suffered from muscular dystrophy and wasn't expected to live to be very old. But they married, they had a child and adopted another. They pioneered to a remote post, and they served there faithfully until she died at the age of 35, still at her post in St. Helena, a remote island in the South Atlantic. It's really a beautiful story, and it's so wonderful that it's being put into a book so others can know about it. So currently Jack is working on a book on the Seven Valleys, so I'm sure we'll look forward to that. And tonight Jack's going to do a presentation on the Station of Abdu'l-Bahá, as clarified by Shoghi Effendi in the Dispensation of Bahá'u'lláh.
Well, thank you, Lynn, so much. And thank you, Cyrus, for that kind introduction. And Lynn, thank you for enlarging a bit on the life of Catherine and Cliff. Yes, it is a truly remarkable story of the wheelchair pioneer, this woman who, in spite of such a disability, wanted to and did pioneer in the relatively brief time she had left to her life. Friends, I know we are all spending a lot of Zoom time these days, and so I didn't want to make this presentation too long. As it turns out, I have 19 slides. I didn't do that intentionally. It just turned out to be a Vahid on its own. So I'm just going to ask anybody who wants to volunteer to read. If there are no volunteers forthcoming, I'll read myself. And if you have questions as we go along, I suggest that we just take the questions on the fly as we go. So in a moment, I'll share the screen, and I want to congratulate the Louisville Bahá'ís for this wonderful initiative. We've started to do a few things in Ottawa here, which is a fairly large community, actually. This is one of the second events. There may be others that I've forgotten about, commemorating the life of Abdu'l-Bahá. And so I've chosen to look at the Station of Abdu'l-Bahá through the lens of the Dispensation of Baha'u'lláh, written by Shoghi Effendi, because the Guardian in that wonderful publication helped to clarify the station of the Master for the North American Baha'is especially, and many of them at that time were confused and actually misinformed about who Abdu'l-Bahá actually was. So it's thanks to Shoghi Effendi that he clarified the station of the three central figures, as well as outlining the features of the Baha'i administrative order in that wonderful document. So I'll just share the screen, and thank you for joining us this evening. Okay, now where is there it is, and I'll just put it on presentation. There we go. So there's the title, as you can see. And I'll begin reading some of it. This is a different photograph of Abdu'l-Bahá we don't see too often. So according to the information that I have found, Abdu'l-Bahá was named Abbas after the great-grandfather of Baha'u'lláh. While Baha'u'lláh was on the earth, he called his son His Excellency the Master, Sarkar-e Agha, His Excellency the Master, or the Master. And as you know, friends, Baha'u'lláh deprecated anybody referring to anybody else as master. Baha'u'lláh said there was one master, and that was Abdu'l-Bahá. So, and of course, as you know, his name means the servant of Baha, and it was the name that he preferred to call himself. Now, what I find interesting about in this signed photo, if you look at the bottom, you can see that he signed it in Latin characters. And what I find interesting about this, friends, that he used small letters for Abdul and Abbas, but he used a capital letter for Baha. And I found that quite intriguing. Perhaps an indication of the master's humility. Now, how do I, okay. Now the problem I have is that part of this text, Jason, part of the text is obscured by, I'm seeing Lynn and myself and a couple, and Wally. How do I get rid of this
Let's see.
this grid on the right that I'm looking at?
So if you go up to your corner, there should be something that says view, and it might say standard or side by side gallery. Do you see that? If you click view.
View, I don't see view at the top. Hide panel view, would that be okay?
Yeah, try that.
Okay, good.
Okay, great.
So now you've all disappeared, unfortunately, but at least I can see the text. In 1934, Shoghi Effendi completed the 65-page seminal text, The Dispensation of Baha'u'lláh, in order to clarify the respective stations of what the Guardian called the three central figures of the Baha'i faith, and to lay down the fundamental distinctive features of the Baha'i administrative order. The first three parts are devoted to defining the stations of the three central figures, Baha'u'lláh, the Bab, and Abdu'l-Bahá. Part 4 is devoted to the administrative order. Although Shoghi Effendi nowhere uses the word theology in his masterful treatise, it is the appropriate word to describe the contents that are devoted to the three central figures. The first three parts are theological in nature. That is, he's defining the stations of the three central figures. The fourth part is dynamic and structural. It describes the unique features of the origin and operation of the administrative order, which is destined to become over time the divinely ordained world government of a unified world community that recognizes the founders of the Baha'i faith. The text was published separately in 1934 as a supplement to Baha'i administration, but Horace Hawley, as editor of the World Order of Baha'u'lláh, decided to include it in the World Order Letters, first published in 1938. Okay. Anne, would you be kind enough to read this next slide? Thank you. Anne, are you there?
I'm here. Raheel
Okay.
Hanum's positive assessment of the dispensation. Raheel Hanum indicates that the dispensation produced nothing less than a quantum leap or a sea change in the understanding of the Baha'i community. The weighty treatise known as the Dispensation of Baha'u'lláh, written in 1934, burst upon the Baha'is like a blinding white light. I remember when I first read it, I had the most extraordinary feeling, as if the whole universe had suddenly expanded around me, and I was looking out into a dazzling, star-filled immensity. However Shoghi Effendi felt in his inmost heart about his other writings, I know from his remarks that he considered he had said all he had to say, in many ways, in the dispensation. Her remark was also validated by Hand of the Cause of God, Mr. Zikrullah Khanem. By writing this proactive document, Shoghi Effendi was able to counteract in advance any misunderstandings and possible schisms that might otherwise have arisen over the station of the three central figures and the origin and nature of the administrative order.
Thank you. And does anybody have any comments or questions at this point? Okay. All right. John, would you read for us next, please?
Station of Baha'u'lláh.
I'm still having dinner, Jack, so
Oh,
now
okay.
my mouth is full.
Okay, and I can ask perhaps David Erickson if he would read. David, are you there?
Here I am.
Okay.
Okay. It was written in 1934 on the 90th anniversary of the founding of the faith.
Oh,
I can't get out the faith. 1844. And the Shoghi Effendi pauses to look back as the
well, David, maybe I should read it then. Okay.
that right part is blocked out.
Okay, well, I can see the whole text. So
Yeah.
it was written in 1934 on the 90th anniversary of the founding of the faith on May 23rd, 1844. In the opening paragraphs, Shoghi Effendi pauses to look back as the Baha'i community stood on the threshold of the last decade of the first century of the Baha'i era. He does both a retrospective and a looking forward. Now, Shoghi Effendi, friends, he often did this in his writings. He would pick a significant anniversary in the faith and he would pause and he would look back and he would do a retrospective and a gathering. Where have we come from? What has happened? What are our accomplishments? And then this would help under his leadership for the friends to get a bigger picture, an overview of the history and the development of the faith, and would enable us to move forward more easily. He says in these opening paragraphs, as he pauses to look back, he is amazed at this supreme theophany. Now, theophany is a theological word, and it means a manifestation of God, of the divine. He is amazed at this supreme theophany, at its towering grandeur. He marvels at how vast, how entrancing the panorama which the revolution of 80 years and 10 unrolls before our eyes. Looking forward, he wrote that it was then timely to clarify the root principles of the faith. So he takes this occasion, this opportunity to do some clarification of the root principles of the faith. And as you already know, this involved the station of the three central figures. He alludes to the three ages of the faith: the primitive or apostolic, the formative or transitional, the age we're in now, and the golden age yet to come. He alludes to these crowded years of heroic deeds. He will, in 1944, explain these heroic deeds more fully in God Passes By. So friends, as the Guardian looks back, he says, this is a marvelous where we have come from since May 23rd, 1834. We see this towering grandeur of this supreme theophany, of this manifestation of God. And he marvels at the panorama which these 80 years and 10 have unrolled. So he is amazed, and we share his amazement at the progress of the faith. So why did Shoghi Effendi write the dispensation? rather than read this, I'll just summarize it. You see, friends, when Abdu'l-Bahá passed away and Shoghi Effendi became guardian, there was a relatively small minority of Western Baha'is who were opposed, and there were not too many of them, to the Baha'i faith being organized. And I don't know if any of you have ever heard the expression Abdu'l-Bahá Baha'is, but I'm old enough to remember that this expression from my early days in Toronto. And because of the master's visit to the West and his personal interactions with and great influence on many of the friends, they had become what used to be called Abdu'l-Bahá Baha'is. So some of these friends were unprepared and ill-informed of the next stage of the development of the faith, as foreseen by Shoghi Effendi, based on the divine charters of the Kitabi Akdas and the will and testament of Abdu'l-Bahá. The stage that consisted of the election of the local and national spiritual assemblies, the appointment of the hands of the cause, the local and national conventions, and the fund, the lifeblood of the cause. So Abdu'l-Bahá had so completely dominated the friends during his ministry that when Shoghi Effendi took us in this entirely new direction of the various plans and the organization of the Baha'i faith and the administrative order, some of the friends were not prepared for this, and actually between 1921 and the first 7-year plan in 37, the Guardian had been patiently educating the friends in these matters. So it was a long process of education that Shoghi Effendi undertook to educate the friends in the organizational aspects of the faith. The Dispensation of Baha'u'lláh was another step in the deepening of the friends in the fundamental verities of the cause. The fact that he wrote the Dispensation of Baha'u'lláh indicates that he felt widespread misunderstanding, or at least an inadequate understanding, of the station of the three central figures and the operation of the Baha'i administrative order still existed. Put more positively, he also thought that the faith had gained enough of an international stature that the time was ripe for him to clarify the questions he had in mind. Any comments or questions at this point, friends? You're welcome to comment. It doesn't have to be a question. All clear so far? Okay, who's going to read next? Volunteers for the next slide?
This is
Anybody?
Jahangir. I will read that.
Thank you.
The most extreme example of an individual who was opposed to the organization of the faith, of the Baha'i faith, was a deluded American, Mrs. Ruth White, who waged a campaign from 1926 to 1929 to discredit the will and testament of Abdu'l-Bahá as a forgery. Mrs. White hired Charles Mitchell, who was a supposed handwriting expert, to investigate the matter. Mr. Mitchell concluded that the will and testament was forged, but Mrs. White's campaign utterly failed. Even the enemies of the master did not deny his authorship of the will. But the German Baha'i Hermann Zimmer revived her charge in 1971. Zimmer wrote a book condemning political Shoghiism. The work of Zimmer was taken up in turn by Swiss ex-Baha'i Francesco Pesiccia, who in 1981 published a book that severely damaged the reputation of the faith in German-speaking Europe. His work was financed by and published by a German evangelical association. Udo Schäfer, Nicola Tawfiq, and Erlich Gollmer published a massive 862-page refutation in year 2000 called Making the Crooked Straight, which largely reversed the situation.
Okay, so that's the most extreme example, Ruth White, of those who believe that the Baha'i faith should not be organized. And you can see how, as was just read, how Hermann Zimmer and Francesco Fucicchia, who used to be a member actually of the Swiss NSA, took up some of these old false accusations and misunderstandings and used it to attack the faith under the guise of scholarship. And fortunately, for the German-speaking Baha'is, Making the Crooked Straight helped to correct this situation, because Fucicchia's book was being accepted in German-speaking Europe as the standard work on the Baha'i faith, which was thinly disguised, really an attack on the guardianship and on the organizational aspect of the Baha'i faith. So friends, let's come to some of the misunderstandings now. I'll go through a few of them with you that the friends in North America had regarding the station of the three central figures. And as I said, had it not been Shoghi Effendi who corrected these misapprehensions, there would have been a lot of confusion and even the possibility of schism had it not been for the covenant and Shoghi Effendi's leadership in these matters as the interpreter of the cause. So I'll just take these point by point. The Western believers, with few exceptions, because of his visible presence and influence among them, thought that Abdu'l-Bahá had a greater station than the Bab. Despite his repeated denials, some of the friends, like Edward Getzinger, continued to believe that Abdu'l-Bahá was a prophet, an attribution that greatly displeased Abdu'l-Bahá. Now, Edward Getzinger, he actually said, you know, friends, don't be fooled by Abdu'l-Bahā's humility. He really is a prophet. He's just too humble to say so. And Getzinger actually was quite bold in publishing this view among some of the friends. And of course, he was not a covenant breaker in any sense, but he just had this misunderstanding. And it does show you what a great impact, charismatic impact Abdu'l-Bahá had on the friends. So what was displeasing to Abdu'l-Bahá about this attribution of prophethood was the belief that the master was a prophet gave credibility to the false charges that the covenant breakers leveled against the master, that he had violated the provisions of the Akdas and claimed divinity. So as you know, the Akdas specified that no divine manifestation would appear before 1,000 years. So the friends who believed this, of course, gave credibility to the covenant breakers' charge. Well, there is Abdu'l-Bahá claiming to be a manifestation of God, and this, of course, is forbidden according to the provisions of the Akdas. So this misunderstanding played right into the hands of the covenant breakers. The next point is that the friends generally minimized the station of the Bab. They considered him to be a sort of inspired precursor like John the Baptist, but what sort of prophet he was not clear to them, again, before the dispensation was written. They did not realize that the Bab was the inaugurator of his own independent dispensation and that it was closely tied to the dispensation of Baha'u'lláh. They had no idea that the Bab was the king of the messengers, as Baha'u'lláh says it in the Tablet of Ahmed. They thought that Abdu'l-Bahá and Baha'u'lláh were joined by a so-called mystic unity, and I'll come to this point in a minute. They generally had little understanding of the divine origin and functioning of the administrative order. The Akdas was not translated yet, and although the Guardian had sent excerpts of the text of the Will and Testament to the North American Friends as early as 1922, they did not have a clear understanding of its provisions and their implications. He sent the complete Will and Testament in 1924, which should have greatly helped to clarify things. The Friends generally had little understanding of the greatness of the Baha'i dispensation, who Baha'u'lláh was as the promised one of all ages, as George Townsend put it, and the prominence of the Baha'i cycle in religious history. So all of the North American Friends at that time had really a lot to learn about the three central figures and the divinely appointed administrative order.
Jack, may I ask a question here quickly before we move on? Edward Getzinger, was he related to Louis Getzinger?
Yes, they were married at one time, and unfortunately, he filed for divorce and they divorced. That is the same Getzinger who was once married to Lua.
Thank you.
And he was much loved by Abdu'l-Bahá. So when we read the dispensation, as Shoghi Effendi is clarifying these things, one of the things that strikes me is the very strong language he uses when he defines these terms. He's very, very emphatic, strongly dogmatic, meant here in its proper sense of a correct doctrine carrying the weight of institutional authority. So in the dispensation, the Guardian is acting very much as the appointed interpreter of the faith and of the teachings. And, you know, Shoghi Effendi did not pull any punches, to use a familiar expression, and he felt very strongly about the things that he was defining. He uses such phrases as open blasphemy, shameless betrayal, heretical belief, direct violation, unpardonable usurpation, emphatically repudiate, tantamount to a betrayal of its cause, violating one of its basic and sacred principles, manifest betrayal, reprehensible, erroneous conception. So you can see that these are very strongly worded phrases. And Shoghi Effendi was, of course, laying down doctrine here, and he was being very emphatic about it. Orthodox doctrine, orthodox meaning correct opinion. And in doing so, he would use discursive reason. In other words, he would use logical arguments, as we'll see in a moment, and his own moral authority in defining the stations of the three central figures and outlining the unique features of the Baha'i administrative order. So we'll come in the next slide to this, more specifically now to the Station of Abdu'l-Bahá. And defining the Station of Abdu'l-Bahá, Shoghi Effendi uses both positive and negative theology. That is, he affirms certain statements as being true, while he emphatically repudiates other statements as being false. So the way that I've set this up, friends, I've put a plus sign. I've used plus signs and minus signs after each one of his definitions. So this is a juxtaposition. The Guardian defines very economically who Abdu'l-Bahá is. That's a plus. And just as importantly, who he is not. That's a minus. So as we're going to see from this particular passage, in this one passage here, Shoghi Effendi defines very clearly both what and who Abdu'l-Bahá was and what and who he was not. So that Abdu'l-Bahá is not a manifestation of God, that's clear. That he gets his light, his inspiration, and sustenance direct from the fountainhead of the Baha'i revelation. So he's not a manifestation, but his light is coming directly from Baha'u'lláh. That he reflects even as a clear and perfect mirror the rays of Baha'u'llah's glory, and does not inherently possess that indefinable yet all-pervading reality, the exclusive possession of which is the hallmark of prophethood. So once again, he's emphasizing the point in different words. He derives his glory from Baha'u'lláh, but yet he's not possessed of the station of prophethood. That his words are not equal in rank, though they possess an equal validity with the utterances of Baha'u'lláh, that he is not to be acclaimed as the return of Jesus Christ, the Son who will come in the glory of the Father. So that point was reiterated by Shoghi Effendi here in the dispensation, even though it had been clarified by Abdu'l-Bahá himself. So friends, I have a question for you here. What does it mean that Abdu'l-Bahā's words are not equal in rank, though they possess an equal validity with the utterances of Baha'u'lláh? How do you make sense of that statement? I'm not saying I can, but I'm wondering how you interpret what that is saying. Not equal in rank, but they possess an equal validity.
This is Jahangir, and if I read a passage from Baha'u'lláh and read Abdu'l-Bahā's interpretation of that, my understanding will be far more greater with his explanation, and therefore that is the validity that is equal, because without that I may even misunderstand the statement made by Baha'u'lláh.
Okay. So I guess I'm wondering, what difference does it make if his words are equally valid with those of Baha'u'lláh? Okay, anybody else? I can't see you here. I'm just seeing the text. So please
There's a
go
couple
ahead.
hands. Judy and then Chuck and Nancy.
Okay. What I see here, though, is that, we're always told that both the words of Baha'u'lláh and the words of Abdu'l-Bahá are scriptural. But I sort of see it as Baha'u'lláh made the statements, made the proclamations, and Abdu'l-Bahá, he didn't make new statements. All of Abdu'l-Bahā's statements are based on Baha'u'llah's statements, so that they're more of an explanation of Baha'u'llah's statements, but he did not make the initial statement. All of his statements are dependent on Baha'u'lláh, but they are still considered scripture as a helpful addendum to Baha'u'llah's writings.
Okay, both comments I take, they're very, very perceptive. That does help us to understand.
Jack, could I say it in a different way?
Certainly, George.
But after studying the Will and Testament and the Covenant, Abdu'l-Bahá couldn't make any laws. He couldn't make, he didn't have any authority to do that. The only thing after Baha'u'lláh was the Universal House of Justice that can actually make laws. So that on his own, he didn't have that power, but he was the interpreter and expounder of Baha'u'llah's original writings, right? I see the difference as that.
Okay. No, those are all excellent points.
There are a couple more hands. Chuck and Nancy and Ann.
Yes, Shoghi Effendi compiled a book of letters that Abdu'l-Bahá sent to the Friends. When the Friends had questions, it's called Some Answered Questions. So in looking at that, Abdu'l-Bahá he clarified questions that people had in the, as to what exactly did Baha'u'lláh mean? Because many times Baha'u'lláh spoke in mystical language that it takes a lot of reflection, and even then you may not glean the core of the meaning. So Abdu'l-Bahá definitely did not change what Baha'u'lláh said. He basically clarified it.
Okay. So I've stopped screen sharing so I can see a few of you now. I'll have to go back to screen sharing when we take up the text.
I was
Yeah,
just
these
going
are
to
all
ask.
excellent points. Anne?
I was just going to add that along with clarifying, explaining, interpreting, the word elaborating comes to mind, that he further elaborated. And when he went to France, for instance, he set forth for the first time the principles that were set forth by Baha'u'lláh. So he explained and elaborated in these talks. And I think we can relate to being Abdu'l-Bahá Baha'is because he was so accessible, especially when he came to the West. And a lot of us, I think, resonate with that sense of connection to him.
Well, thank you. You're all helping me to understand, because I used to think, well, what difference does it make if his words are equal in validity? But of course, the point about not equal in rank is not to be ignored either. But for all intents and purposes, you know, the words have the same value. So, but we recognize that the station is different. So thank you, friends, for helping me to understand it.
Rick,
One
were you
more
raising your
thing.
hand?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Oh, okay. The difference between the Bab and Baha'u'lláh and Abdu'l-Bahá is that the Bab and Baha'u'lláh were manifestations of God who received direct revelation from God. Abdu'l-Bahá did not. That's the difference in rank.
Right. But the Friends, of course, in the early days of the faith, they did not understand this, which is one of the reasons that the Guardian wrote the Dispensation. So, any other comments before we go on then? Okay, let me go back here. All right, we'll take a few other points. In this statement, the Guardian makes it clear that the master station of pure servitude should not be taken to mean that he is just another servant among the servants of Baha'u'lláh.
Well,
To
Jack,
conclude,
did you mean to reshare your screen?
no, I can read the text now, so it's fine.
Oh, okay. Everybody else can't see it though.
Oh, I see. Oh, I didn't reshare the screen. Now, How do I do that? Okay, I've got to stop presenting for a moment. Okay, oh goodness, what am I looking at here? I see my text. Got to go back to screen sharing. Where is that, Jason? Should I?
Yeah, in Zoom, in the bottom there, it says share screen.
Yeah, I'll have to press on Zoom again. There we go. Okay. I'm sorry.
No
Sorry for
worries.
the inconvenience there. All right. Well, I've clicked on it. Nothing seems to be happening yet.
Did the little window not pop up that asks you which window to share?
Yeah, the window is there and I'm clicking on it,
Does it
but
let you
it's
select
not.
the
There we
yeah, there
go.
we go.
Okay. All right, we'll continue.
All right.
So, Jason, everybody can see this now?
Yes.
Okay. So I'll repeat it. In this statement, the guardian makes it clear that the master's station of pure servitude should not be taken to mean that he is just another servant among the servants of Baha'u'lláh. So, friends, you may have noticed that the guardian tends to correct statements that lean too far in one direction or another. If you've read Shoghi Effendi carefully, you'll see that he does that all the time. And this is another example of that type of clarification and correction. To conclude such a thing would be both an intellectual and moral error that would lower the dignity of the Station of Abdu'l-Bahá. Nor does his title of interpreter mean that he was just an interpreter of the teachings. So he's not just a servant and he's not just an interpreter. Okay, he's much more than that. So we have this statement here from the guardian. From such clear and formally laid down statements, incompatible as they are with any assertion of a claim to prophethood, we should not, that should be by any means, that's a typo, sorry. We should not by any means infer that Abdu'l-Bahá is merely one of the servants of the Blessed Beauty, or at best one whose function is to be confined to that of the authorized interpreter of his father's teachings. Far be it from me to entertain such a notion or to wish to instill such sentiments. So what the guardian's doing there, friends, is he's avoiding minimization. Don't interpret this to mean he's just an interpreter and nothing else, or that he's just a servant and nothing else. So I think what the guardian's trying to do here is to avoid extremes in interpretation. Indeed, as I have already stated, those who overestimate, so now he goes from one extreme to the other extreme, those who overestimate Abdu'l-Bahā's station are just as reprehensible and have done just as much harm as those who underestimate it. And this for no other reason except that by insisting upon an altogether unwarranted inference. An inference is like a deduction that you have no basis making. An unwarranted inference from Baha'u'llah's writings, they are inadvertently justifying and continuously furnishing the enemy, that is the covenant breakers, with proofs for his false accusations and misleading statements that, for example, Abdu'l-Bahá claimed to be a manifestation of God. So the guardian is trying to correct at both ends, underestimating and overestimating. So it's very balanced. Any questions or comments? Everybody's happy. Okay.
Oh, Rita had her hand up.
Oh, sorry, I can't see Rita. Go ahead, Rita, please.
Well, I was wondering if maybe some of the confusion might come in because we use the word manifestation of God to characterize these great beings like the Bahá'u'lláh, the Christ, and so on, Muhammad. Whereas the word prophet in the Old and New Testament is just somebody that supposedly is inspired by God in some way, but they don't have the station. I don't think any Christian or Jewish person would argue that they have the same station as, say, Moses or Jesus. So, maybe I'm thinking, maybe that's where some of the confusion comes into all of this, that if we only use the word manifestation of God, I think that can help clarify and not use the word prophet at all, because then it gets into this whole confusion of, like Muhammad is referred to as a prophet, but we think of him as a manifestation of God. So, maybe, I don't know, maybe you'd like to comment on that, or somebody would like to comment on that.
Thank you. Yes, I would like to comment. And I don't think, some of the friends are doing that. They're using the word manifestation to refer to the higher prophets or the major prophets alone. But the word is not used that way. The word prophet is also used in our writings frequently in the Gleanings. The Guardian used it with a capital P, sometimes to refer to the major manifestations, the founders of the world's religions. So I don't think we can be so restrictive that way to stop using the word prophet, because the word is used in Arabic and Persian. It was translated that way by Shoghi Effendi. It's a useful distinction to say that, the higher prophets are manifestations, but we also have to look at the functions of the prophets. What are the criteria which justifies them to be called prophets? Because there are major and there are minor prophets. So it is a useful suggestion up to a point, and I take the point, but we have to realize that our own sacred writings still use frequently the word prophet, as did Shoghi Effendi in his explanation. So, but I think you're right that perhaps the confusion crept in if they saw Abdu'l-Bahá as maybe some sort of minor prophet or something along those lines. And of course, as in English, we know that the word prophet is used so loosely today, so carelessly. So-and-so is a prophet of this, and he was a prophet of that, or whatever. And it's used in a very specific way in our sacred writings and in Baha'i theology. Does anybody else want to make a comment there?
David has his hand up.
All right. David?
Yeah, Abdu'l-Bahá, as we all know, was called himself the center of the covenant, and the perfect exemplar. And as you know, it just is, like in Baha'u'llah's Kitabiyat, Abdu'l-Bahá, he refers to Abdu'l-Bahá without naming him, but it's very clear that Baha'u'llah has chosen him to be that center of the covenant and the expounder of his revelation. And so that all his powers, as already has been mentioned, come from Baha'u'llah. And so that everything he knew really came from Baha'u'lláh. The impulse of it came from Baha'u'lláh. Without Abdu'l-Bahá, in relation to Baha'u'llah's revelation, the covenant would not be what it is. So it was totally necessary. And the whole thing of the unity, the reality of the unity of the Baha'i faith stems from that covenant. And Abdu'l-Bahá was certainly the example of that. So I think this is very important for us to understand.
Yes, he's a person who's also an institution, and we're going to come to some of these points that were raised, that he was a perfect human being. He had some of the attributes of the prophets without being a prophet. So there's which is why Baha'u'llah called him Sirullah, the mystery of God. Okay, so another view, if there are no other questions, I'll go on. Are there any other questions, John? No?
I don't see any.
Okay, sir. Now, the mystic unity. This was another erroneous conception, as Shoghi Effendi called it. It was based on an altogether extravagant interpretation of certain terms and passages in the Tablet of the Branch, Lahe Gosna, okay? The distinguished American believer Horace Hawley, in later Hand of the Cause of God, the editor of Baha'i Scriptures, had prefaced the text of the Tablet of the Branch, with other phrases that formed no part of it. And the Guardian names these phrases, the tongue of the ancient, the greatest name, and the covenant. And Shoghi Effendi interprets these phrases respectively to mean God. Secondly, that's the tongue of the ancient, the greatest name, Baha'u'lláh, and that general covenant that God established with mankind, not the lesser covenant that Baha'u'lláh established with Abdu'l-Bahá. So you can see how, I'm sure that Horace Hawley was well-intentioned in doing this, but according to Shoghi Effendi, it caused misunderstanding. And the reason for that follows here. Now, personally, friends, I like the phrase mystic unity for a lot of reasons, but we cannot speak of a mystic unity of Abdu'l-Bahá with Baha'u'llah for the following reasons. It can only refer to the unity that the Baha'u'llah and the Bab share, or the mystic unity of God with his manifestations, or that the manifestations of God have with one another, not that of Baha'u'llah with Abdu'l-Bahá. Now, before I read this, as far as I was concerned, why wouldn't there be a mystic unity between father and son? But Shoghi Effendi says, no, to maintain a mystic unity of father and son would have to mean that the master occupied the same station as Baha'u'llah, a view that Shoghi Effendi explained was entirely false and harmful to the cause because it constituted a violation of the provisions of the Kitab-i Aqdas, and to repeat, that it played into the hands of the covenant breakers that another manifestation of God would not appear ere the expiration of a full 1,000 years. So Shoghi Effendi is very careful about these things because, and very dogmatic, if you like, emphatic in laying down his definitions for the simple reason that they can create serious misunderstandings that can lead to quarrels and dissension and so on. Any comments or questions here at this point, friends?
Just a comment. This is Jahangir. There is also Shoghi Effendi has used the phrase mystic intercourse.
Yes.
He says the administrative order is a result of mystic intercourse between the minds of Baha'u'lláh and Abdu'l-Bahá. So I think I just wanted to make sure that people, the friends, are not confusing mystic unity with mystic intercourse.
That's a very good point, and I probably should have pointed that out myself, that yes, mystic intercourse between Baha'u'lláh and Abdu'l-Bahá, yes, but not mystic unity. Jahangir, that's a very good point, and I thank you for sharing it with the friends and with me. So, in pointing this out, friends, I'm trying to also point out to you how the Guardian used logic, deductive logic, consequential logic in laying down these definitions. So the logical consequence of believing in a mystic unity of Baha'u'lláh and Abdu'l-Bahá would result, Shoghi Effendi lays down, in a false, inescapable inference. That is a good example of the Guardian's consequential logic. And he writes, furthermore, the inescapable inference from the belief in the identity of the author of our faith with him who is the center of his covenant would be to place Abdu'l-Bahá in a position superior to that of the Bab, the reverse of which is the fundamental, though not as universally recognized, principle of this revelation. So as late as 1934, people were still confusing this. They thought that Abdu'l-Bahá had a higher station than the Bab. And this is precisely one of the reasons why the Guardian wrote the Dispensation, to clear these things up. So the Baha'i world owes an incredible debt of gratitude to the beloved Guardian for doing that. So I've chosen this as a magisterial statement on Abdu'l-Bahá by Shoghi Effendi, and he packs in so many attributes of the master. It's a wonderful definition and description. Would anybody like to read this one? No, I've noticed that sometimes the Baha'is don't always volunteer so quickly.
This is Jackie. I'll read
Yeah.
it. I'll read it.
Okay.
He is and should for all time be regarded first and foremost as the center and pivot of Baha'u'llah's peerless and all-enfolding covenant, his most exalted handiwork, the stainless mirror of his light, the perfect exemplar of his teachings, the unerring interpreter of his word, the embodiment of every Baha'i ideal, the incarnation of every Baha'i virtue, the most mighty branch sprung from the ancient root, the limb of the law of God, the being around whom all names revolve, the mainspring of the oneness of humanity, the ensign of the most great peace, the moon of the central orb of this most holy dispensation, styles and titles that are implicit and find their truest, their highest, and fairest expression in the magic name Abdu'l-Bahá. He is, above and beyond these appellations, the mystery of God, an expression by which Baha'u'lláh himself has chosen to designate him, and which, while it does not by any means justify us to assign to him the station of prophethood, the incompatible characteristics of a human nature and superhuman knowledge and perfection have been blended and are completely harmonized.
Okay, and thank you. what a wonderful statement. It's why I've called it magisterial. And, you know, I can tell you that every phrase that Shoghi Effendi wrote is packed. For example, you could take every single one of those phrases and write a dissertation or a paper, a disquisition on it, every single phrase. And I'd like to ask you if there's a phrase there among these styles and titles, which is in itself a beautiful expression. Is there something there that strikes you that you'd like to comment on? It's a very, very rich description.
Go ahead, Anne.
I think the fact that it combines superhuman knowledge and perfection, you know, with a human nature. And that's one reason we love Abdu'l-Bahá so much, because we relate more to his human nature, and the prophet seems so exalted, and yet he's our guide and mentor, and you know, he is superhuman in that sense. And so many examples of when he had foreknowledge of things, or he would not get perturbed when things would happen and then it would turn out it was the best thing. You know, there were so many things like that happen to indicate that he was beyond human.
Yeah, for sure. Of course, the phrase a perfect human being is a contradiction in terms, but normally, right? But the Guardian is saying here, in the person of Abdu'l-Bahá, the incompatible, right? The normally incompatible. The incompatible characteristics of a human nature and superhuman knowledge and perfection have been blended and are completely harmonized. So this is another mystery. And as Anne said, you know, this is a superhuman being, and there will never be another Abdu'l-Bahá for the duration of the Baha'i cycle, I imagine, at least, for at least 500,000 years. He's a unique individual in all of religious history. Any other questions or comments on this particular passage?
Yeah, Jack.
Jackie
could I
has
say
her
something?
hand up. Sorry,
Um,
George, and then Jackie.
When you almost have to feel sorry for people that met Abdu'l-Bahá and found it hard to believe in Baha'u'lláh, that there was anything greater than Abdu'l-Bahá, because nobody had witnessed anything as in a human being as great as Abdu'l-Bahá. So I know it's like silly, and we know that Baha'u'lláh is who he is, but you can almost understand how people couldn't conceive of anything greater.
That's right, George. And that's exactly what Ali Quli Khan said, who was one of my Aunt Ruth's teachers in Washington. He used to say, we can't explain them who Abdu'l-Bahá is. How do we explain to them who Baha'u'lláh is? who's even greater than the master. So yeah, it's true. It's no wonder that there were these misunderstandings. And as again, we're all grateful to Shoghi Effendi for clarifying. So there's another comment or question.
Jackie, and then Rita.
I think to me, it starts out at the very beginning as the center and pivot of Baha'u'llah's peerless and all-unfolding covenant. You look around all of the different religions and everything that are out here today, and how many schisms and how many branches and everything else, but a center and a pivot that has maintained this unity, which is the very central principle of Baha'u'lláh, and he is the pivot and the center of that process. I think it's just such a beautiful gift that we've been given.
Yes, it's all very wonderful and fantastic, isn't it? But each one of these phrases, as we pour over them, is just loaded with meaning. The styles and titles.
All right, go ahead, Rita.
Yeah, I mean, I find like a lot of these terms very interesting. They're not they're not as familiar as, say, the center of the covenant. We've all heard that one a lot. But like the mainspring of the oneness of humanity, you know, what does that mean? Like he is one that really made people aware. You know, we know when he traveled and he talked to people, he constantly made that point, the oneness of humanity, which people of that time, for the most part, didn't really consider. You know, they thought that like the white race was superior to all the other races and so on. So, you know, he brought that, and then the ensign of the most great peace. You know, again, like bringing some of these concepts which were very new to people in the idea of world peace. And then I find this next one very interesting because it's so different from the two before it, which are kind of have to do with practical issues. And then all of a sudden you have this poetic phrase thrown in there, the moon of the central orb. In other words, we know the moon reflects the glory of the sun. That's how we're able to see the moon. And so the central orb, of course, would be Baha'u'lláh. And so that's kind of interesting that he put this real poetic phrase in there. You know, it's just like you said, it's so interesting to look at all these different ways that Abdu'l-Bahá is described. And like I said, some of them I hadn't really ever heard before. You don't see them very often. So thank you for sharing that. I think it's very interesting.
Well, you're very welcome, and you've commented on the very phrase that I was going to point out this, and you've used the right word. It is a wonderfully poetic phrase, the moon of the central orb of this most holy dispensation, which you've correctly said. Of course, the central orb is Baha'u'lláh. And of course, this also corresponds to the doctrine or the theology perfectly. The poetic expression and the theology match, because the master reflected the light of Baha'u'lláh. So it's not just poetry, it's also very applicable theologically, so to speak. Any others? It's a very, very rich paragraph. We could all write or try to write a paper on each phrase. Take any one. Take any one and take the incarnation of every Baha'i virtue and try to develop that, or the embodiment of every Baha'i ideal. Or yes, that interesting one, the mainspring of the oneness of humanity, that has already been commented on. So there's a whole arsenal in that passage waiting to be developed by the friends, I'm sure, and will be over time. Okay, can we move on? We're getting closer to the end.
Looks like it. No hands at the moment.
Okay. Any readers for this one?
I can read that one.
Thank you.
This is Nancy.
Hi, Nancy.
Hi. From Baha'u'llah's tablet of the branch regarding Abdu'l-Bahá. Render thanks unto God, O people, for his appearance. For verily he is the most great favor unto you, the most perfect bounty upon you. And through him every moldering bone is quickened. Whoso turneth towards him hath turned towards God, and whoso turneth away from him hath turned away from my beauty, hath repudiated my proof, and transgressed against me. He is the trust of God amongst you, his charge within you, his manifestation unto you, and his appearance among his favored servants. We have sent him down in the form of a human temple. Blessed and sanctified be God, who createth whatsoever he willeth through his inviolable, his infallible decree. They who deprive themselves of the shadow of the branch are lost in the wilderness of error, are consumed by the heat of worldly desires, and are of those who will assuredly perish.
Thank you. So that is excerpted by Shoghi Effendi himself and then translated by him in the World Order of Baha'u'lláh, page 135. And the strange thing about covenant breakers, and they are a strange, weird group of people, is that in spite of these emphatic warnings about turning away from Abdu'l-Bahá and disobeying him and so on and so forth, they still do it. That is what's so extraordinarily tragic. They are extremely willful people in their blindness. And, you know, the warnings are so clear. They're lost in the wilderness of error, are consumed by the heat of worldly desires, and are of those who would assuredly perish, who will assuredly perish. But the warnings are not enough for some people. Okay. Now here's the one that we all know. In the same tablet that he wrote to some believers in America, in which he denied again that he was the return of Jesus Christ, he wrote the most famous statement with which he has been associated regarding the declaration of his own station. My name is Abdu'l-Bahá. My qualification is Abdu'l-Bahá. My reality is Abdu'l-Bahá. My praise is Abdu'l-Bahá. Thraldom to the blessed perfection is my glorious and refulgent diadem, and servitude to all the human race, my perpetual religion. No name, no title, no mention, no commendation, no commendation have I, nor will ever have, except Abdu'l-Bahá. This is my longing, this is my greatest yearning, this is my eternal life, this is my everlasting glory. So friends, it's interesting that Abdu'l-Bahá was not called Abdu'l-Bahá by the members of his own family. They called him Abbas or Abbas Effendi. But this is the title by which he became known, you know, in the Baha'i community. And that was his own preference. Okay, we've reached the end of the Vahid of the slides. I hope you've enjoyed it, friends. Any other questions or comments? Yes, Jahangir, Aghay Jahangir.
Yes, I think I should have mentioned that when we were discussing the dispensation of Baha'u'lláh, and that is kind of a memory from my junior youth and youth years, that when the beloved guardian suddenly and untimely passing away, I was in Tehran, Iran, and there was lots of anxiety and uncertainty about the future of the faith. The fact that the guardian had not left a document called the will. And I remember Mr. Furutan came to Iran, and while he's explaining to the friends the duties and responsibilities of the hands of the cause of God, he, in a very uncertain term, mentioned that dispensation of Baha'u'lláh is truly, should be considered the will and testament of Shoghi Effendi, written in his own lifetime, because he did not possess any physical possessions to write a will about who is going to get what. But this is his statement that should remain for the balance of the Baha'i era as the will and testament of the beloved guardian.
That's a very good point, Cyrus. And by the way, do you go by Cyrus or Jahangir? Which name?
Jahangir is my first name. Cyrus is my last name.
Oh, okay. So that's a reversal of a little bit. Thank you. Yes, and some of the hands were aware of this. Mr. Khadem was also aware of this, and Rahia Khanum said so, you know, that this was his will and testament, considered it to be his greatest legacy to the Baha'i world. It's rather surprising when you think of all the work he did on Dawn Breakers and God Passes By, that this shorter document, and perhaps the reason is that it had such a tremendous impact on the understanding of the Baha'i community. I mean, that's why I've called it a sea change. It was absolutely revolutionary. It revolutionized the understanding of both the administrative order and the station of the three central figures. So Shoghi Effendi really straightened us out with that document and guided us. Otherwise, we could have gone off in many different directions of who was Abdu'l-Bahá, who was the Bab, who was Baha'u'lláh, and so on and so forth. You know how theological questions are so prone to dissension and opinion and so on and so forth. So we're very thankful that the covenant was there and that Shoghi Effendi was guiding us through this process. Anybody else would like to comment at this point or ask a question?
Yeah, Wally here. I really enjoyed this. To me, Abdu'l-Bahá is so blessed. I can see how over the years that he was in the United States, how he affected, especially in my eyes, the Native American people. Just so blessed. So blessed. Also, I wanted to tell you guys, the 15th, I had a brain bleed, and they did some surgery in my head. I just got out of the hospital on Monday, and there's one more procedure, so I'd like to have you guys remember me in your prayers.
We will pray for you, Wally.
Thank you.
Okay. There's a few other people there. There's Judy and Danielle. Anybody else like to make any further comments, questions? And if not, I will take my leave.
I'd just
Thank you very much.
very much.
Thank you so much. It was great. Thank you.
Thank you for a great program.
Jack.
You're very welcome.
Thank you, Jack.
Well, I hope, friends, that I've read somewhere that Baha'u'lláh felt that the Friends, I'm not sure where I read this, but that he felt that the Friends did not, what's the word, venerate Abdu'l-Bahá as much as they should. So perhaps this little presentation has helped us to better appreciate what a priceless gift. You know, one of the phrases from Ilahi Ghosn was, we have sent him down in the form of a human temple. And you know, Khalil Gibran, the great writer, who was a neighbor of Juliet Thompson, as some of you know, who felt he didn't need any manifestation to get him in touch with God. He thought he was good enough on his own until he met Abdu'l-Bahá. And he said, when I met Abdu'l-Bahá, before that, I didn't realize that the Holy Spirit could inhabit the body of a human being. But when I met Abdu'l-Bahá, I realized that. And by the way, just to correct a misunderstanding, he didn't think of Abdu'l-Bahá when he wrote the Prophet, but he said when he wrote the Son of Man, that Abdu'l-Bahá was the inspiration for that book.
Yeah.
So,
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
So much.
You know,
Okay.
I
Thank
think your presentation,
Lapa.
wonderful.
Jack.
Thanks,
you.
Louisville, so much. It was lovely to visit with you.
Thank you.
Maybe I'll see
Thank
you
you,
again.
everybody.
Yes.
Thank
Allah
you, Jack.
Allahu
Allah.
Akbar. Thank you so
Thanks,
much.
Jack.
Allah.
Allah.
Thank you, Lynn and John, for getting you hooked up with us.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Thank you so much, friends. Allahu
Thank you.
Akbar.
Allahu Akbar. Have a
Allahu
nice
Akbar.
evening.
Where's everybody going?
That was great, Lynn. That was wonderful.
Thanks, Liz.
Yes.
Where'd John go?
I guess he left.
Oh, I don't know. Maybe he's coming in here. So we didn't go around and say where everybody was from. That would have been fun.
I know, it would have been.
International group here.
Lynn, this is the first of a three-part thing. Do you have different speakers then for the next two?
We're having one a month for the whole year.
Some months too.
Well, send
When's
it
the
to them
next?
if you want. They're all really good speakers. And we've got
When's the next one?
it's the last Thursday of every month, right? I think.
I don't remember if it's the third or fourth Thursday, but yeah, we're going to have one in later in May. Brendan, Rick, we'll let you know exactly. I'll send you the schedule of talks as soon as we get it all put together in a nice format, and then every month we'll send you the Zoom link.
Oh, thank you.
Okay.
Kathy and George, we won't do that for you.
It
because
goes
we don't
along with.
No, of course we will. Yes.
Hey, thanks, John. I knew I could depend on you. Yeah.
International prejudice.
It's true. We won't tell you that. No, I won't say it.
Are we gonna-
No.
We
No, it's about Lynn renouncing her Canadian citizenship and becoming U.S. citizenship.
We didn't do that. What about it?
The only problem is if we go to war with Canada,
I'm in trouble.
no, I know she's going to kill me.
Did she get a COVID shot quicker that way?
Oh,
Everybody gone yet? Except for
No.
Wally.
well, we didn't know about you, Wally. I'm sorry I didn't know about your procedure.
Well, I didn't know that I was having it either.
Wow.
It was kind of by surprise that happened.